Welcome to On the Line. I'm Christine Williams. Coming up, coping with grief. Our emphasis, the loss of a parent. Stay tuned. Coping with the loss of a loved one is one of life's greatest challenges. It's important to remember that how one grieves is an individual process. No two people are the same. The length of time one person may take to come to terms with a loss will be different than another. And there are impacting variables like who you may have lost, the age of that person and the survivors, and the circumstances surrounding the loss. We're here to offer you sound information today on ways to cope with grief. Our emphasis is on the loss of a parent. Dr. Bill Webster, a grief counselor, is joining me now. Later on, you'll hear from another guest who lost both his parents in a relatively short space of time. And remember, our lines are open for you to call in at any time with any of your questions. Dr. Webster, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure as always, Christine. Thank you for having me.
You always share such wonderful information when you come here, and today is a particularly different day for you. It represents one of significance as it's the anniversary of the loss of your own dad.
Well, that's absolutely right. Thank you very much, Christine. April 11th, 1971 was a very special day. It happened to be Easter Sunday, and it was also the day that Jack Nicklaus won the Masters Golf Championship. But I remember that day for a very different reason, because it was on April 11th, 1971 that my dad died. Although many years have passed, I've never forgotten that day, and even more importantly, I've never forgotten the influence that my dad had on my life, even in the few short years that I knew him. While many of us realize that someday we will probably bury our parents, somehow that inevitability seems to catch us by surprise. Some of the grief reactions can be intense and seemingly out of proportion to the situation. Some of the most commonly expressed reactions are, I feel like an orphan, or I feel like the last barrier between me and my own mortality has been removed. I'm frustrated or angry or guilty because there was something more I needed to say. I think it's important to note that we respond to the death of a parent like a child of that parent. Several factors help produce each of these reactions. The first is the belief that our parents are immortal. While that may not seem rational or logical, many of us hold to the idea that our parents will live forever. Perhaps it develops in childhood as a deeply entrenched coping mechanism. We don't want to think of anything happening to our parents because then what would happen to me? How would I manage without them? The second thing is that we lose our protection. While we may be adults and no longer depend on our parents for care and security, we still have that childlike inner need. In many situations, adult children are looking after parents and providing them care and safety and security, but nonetheless, most of us hold on to the idea that no one cares like your mom. In a strange way then, an adult who loses a parent often feels like a forsaken child. We grow up as children depending on parents for safety and security. While in real life this isn't always realized, we nonetheless hold on to that expectation. So when a parent dies, we often feel very vulnerable to the world in general. This can be what the statement, I feel like an orphan, is expressing. When a parent dies, particularly the last surviving parent, there's the realization that you are next in line for death. Now, while we know logically that deaths don't happen in chronological order, nonetheless, when you lose that buffer, it opens up the possibility that I'm next. As a matter of fact, later this very year, I will be the same age as my dad was the day he died. And you bet I've thought about that. But remember, it's understanding the feeling that helps us comprehend the statement. Because my awareness of that can either cause depression, or it can make me acutely aware of the quantity and quality of my remaining life. And the third thing, I think, is losing the opportunity to deal with unfinished business. The death of a parent can bring on regrets such as, my father never told me he loved me, or I was never able to find out why father left or mother divorced him, or they would never discuss why they never wanted another child. Or have you heard someone say, I never knew why my father never grieved after my brother's death and would never talk about it. Finally, the loss of a parent often means the loss of history. Mom knew all about her grandparents and their history. You know, the stories that we all listen to but don't pay much attention. And so the loss of a parent often means the loss of family history, unless it was written down or recorded. We won't be able to find out exactly what Granddad did in the war and the history of that medal that's been a family treasure. My own dad died when I was still in university. How many times I've wished that he could have seen how the rest of my life turned out, or been there for his grandchildren, or participated in my important life events. It's not unusual for someone to think, if only my father or mother could see me now and be proud of me, or advise me in this situation. So I think, Christine, these are some of the issues that arise out of the loss of a parent.
Well, Dr. Webster, I'm certainly glad that you shared that with our audience, because the point here is that you've gotten out a lot of information, food for thought, that many people don't even know how to decipher it, what to make of it once it strikes. And I want to start up by asking you one question before we go for our break, and it has to do with what you said about feeling like an orphan. That's incredible, because you're saying that's possible no matter what age a person may be.
I think we cope with the loss of a parent as a child, because that was the initial relationship. Interestingly, you can turn it around. A parent who loses a child always psychologically feels like they've lost their baby, even though the child may actually be much older. And I think that it's that initial basic need that we had for security and safety, which we found in mom or dad or in a parent, and that initial reaction comes back at the death. Of course, we need to sit down and figure out, you know what, I'll be okay, I'll be fine. And it opens up a whole new avenue of reinterpreting ourselves as individuals and people who have benefited from the influence of that parent and now who must carry on that legacy.
The bittersweet phenomena, you talked about cherishing the memories of the loved one that's passed on, but at the same time, when one could be feeling so raw, how could you reconcile the two? Because those very beautiful memories could be aggravating the grief process at a certain point.
I think that's a very, very interesting point, a very, very good question, if I may say. I think that when someone dies, all we can think about is of the death. And so for weeks after I was only 6 weeks away from graduation. I had to go back to university and do exams and threw myself into it. But every time I thought about my dad, I thought about his death. And that's upsetting, that's disturbing. I had to allow myself to not only think about his death, but to think about his life. So we have to let the light of the years shine on the event, rather than allowing the darkness of the event to cast its shadow on the years.
Well said.
It's just a different way of looking at things, and a different perspective on putting the death in the context of the life. Remembering that they've died, of course, but also remembering that they've lived, and as a result, what they've left.
And that's sometimes a process in itself to come to that.
That indeed is the grief process. And that's some of the things that we help people work with in our support programs in terms of reconciling the situation that's occurred to them.
Wow. Now, Bill, we're going to have to go for our first break. But when we come back, the fact that you lost your dad at that, and I would say a very delicate age. I mean, some people lose a parent very young. But that is a critical age, and I think the whole age process, I mentioned that in the introduction, can bear an enormous significance. Right. Once again, to you, the viewer, our lines are open for you to call in at any time with any of your questions. We'll be back after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our program today. We're talking about coping with grief. Our emphasis is on the passing of a parent. Our lines are open for you to call in at any time with any of your questions pertaining to grief. Now, Dr. Bill Webster is our guest for today. He's a grief counselor. And Dr. Webster, I was asking you about the implication of age, which, in my opinion, as a layperson with this whole process, is very significant. You mentioned the fact in your father's passing that you were close to graduation, a very significant time indeed, weeks before your graduation, and you lost your dad at that point.
I think I was 23 or 24, and so that means people can now figure out my age, but that's okay. I'd actually seen my dad suffer for 4 or 5 years before with Parkinson's disease. Now remember, this was back at the time before there was any treatment for Parkinson's. So it was very difficult because my dad went from being a very energetic, humorous, brilliant golfer, involved in everything, friend to everybody, to a place where his body didn't work anymore. We knew he was in there, but nothing worked. And so it was very, very difficult. And I think as a young person, seeing your model into manhood, so I think that was difficult. There's never an easy time or an easy age to lose someone that we care about. So it was a difficult time. But what was interesting was that when my own 2 boys came to their early 20s, and I started to realize, I'm developing a relationship with them that I actually never had with my own dad. And yet it enabled me to kind of think about, well, what would that have been like? And I can only imagine, but I do imagine because I think, my dad's influence. I've said many times to people that although my dad died in my early 20s, I believe that I was very fortunate in the dad that I had. He gave me everything I needed. And so I think sometimes it's not just what we've lost, but what we can give to our children, even in 20 or 25 years, in terms of legacy and example and moral values and these kinds of things. And so I've never forgotten my dad. I modeled my own parenting, even though I've carried it much further.
But that's a very positive twist. I'm going to ask you another side of this, though, in terms of your own counseling and your own experience with different types of individuals. Can a youngster, particularly a child, ever feel angry at the fact that a parent has died and left them, so to speak? Or perhaps you mentioned your father's illness. They see the decline of the parent and they feel that they're losing out somehow in the process.
I think many times people are angry. They feel angry because they've been left. It's like a little child in a supermarket who gets lost, and that child is angry. Of course the child's upset, but they're also very angry. Anger in grief is usually rooted in a sense of helplessness and powerlessness. And many of the phrases that I used in my introduction is really the child saying, how am I going to manage without my dad? How am I going to manage without my mom? From a practical perspective, some people would say, well, come on, pull yourself together. You'll manage, you'll be fine, you're old enough. But psychologically, it's this initial childlike reaction, not childish, childlike reaction that says, how am I going to manage without a mom? On a practical level, we know, but in a deep psychological level, we wonder. And so we're angry because we've been left. We're angry because we're saying, well, now I'm on my own. And also maybe because of this idea of our own mortality and the last barrier between me and my death being removed. Now I'm next. Or particularly when my mom died, many years after my dad died, and my second parent died, my reaction was, all of the relationships that I depended on are now gone. All of my relationships now, they depend on me. Of course, I depend on my wife and all of these kinds of things, but it's different. These dependent relationships that you have with a parent, and when suddenly they're gone, and all of a sudden you realize, no, everybody's depending on me, I'm the one, then I think that can be a very challenging time.
And it took an adjustment for you.
It's a big adjustment, sure.
Now, time in terms of how long a person takes to adjust. I mentioned in the introduction that grief is a very individual process, particularly in our society where we're so fast-paced. We can hear voices of friends saying things like, you got to get over it, you got to move on. Can you give us perspective there?
I think that's right. I think sometimes people say to me, how long does grief last? And here's my favorite answer. Much longer than people who haven't been through it seem to think. Because I think that so often we think that after 3 months you'll be over it. And especially if a parent is elderly and they've been suffering, and you've had a long time caring for that parent, we sometimes think, oh, you must be relieved, but that's not often the reaction. And so I think that there is no time frame for grief. Everyone needs to take their own time. And in fact, you never get over it. You adjust to a new situation. That's the adjustment. A new environment in which this lost relationship is no longer present. And so sometimes people never get over it. Sometimes people never recover. The good news is it's a choice. If someone wants to, they can. But it's hard work, and it's dealing with some very deep and important issues in terms of getting through the situation and finding new ways of interpreting ourselves and our situation.
When you addressed our audience about the loss of your dad and some of the key aspects in dealing with loss, you said something critical, and that had to do with regrets. Will you say that the grief process is quite different for a person who has plenty of regrets, perhaps? Perhaps it was a relationship of enmity versus one that was a close friendship type of relationship with a parent.
Again, a very, very important question, Christine. And I think that's absolutely right. Grief is always intimately connected to the relationship that we've lost. And sometimes people will grieve, and you look at the situation and say, well, actually, it was an abusive situation or an aggressive situation, or they didn't get along or whatever. I think sometimes we not only grieve what we've lost, I think we also grieve what we never had. And sometimes you'll find that someone will grieve the fact that they never had a chance to say something to a parent, or the parent never took the opportunity to tell that child how they loved them or whatever. And sometimes it goes without saying, and that's not necessarily a good thing. So yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely very important to recognize that the loss of a parent isn't necessarily always a good thing and a nice, wonderful relationship. Yes. There are some very conflicted relationships out there, but yet there's still grief. And I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize
Critical to acknowledge that, yes. Now, Dr. Webster, we have to go for another break. And to you, the viewer, our phone lines are open for you to call in at any time with any of your questions. Now, after this break, you're going to be meeting a second guest who will be joining us. He'll tell us about the loss of both his parents. Now, that loss happened at different times, but quite close to each other. The interesting thing is, too, is that we're going to show you a clip of the fellow's mom. An interview was done with her not long before her passing away. So stay tuned. We'll be back. Welcome back to On the Line. I'm Christine Williams. We're talking about coping with grief today. Our emphasis is on the loss of a parent. Joining me now is Hagen Gott, who lost his parents in quite a short space of time. You're also going to get to see an interview with his mom shortly before she passed away. Hagen, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Christine. It's a pleasure.
Now, I just mentioned to our audience that you lost your parents in close proximity with one another. How did that affect? Did you expect it to be that close, first of all?
No. Mom had breast cancer, and she'd been battling it, and my dad was her caregiver, her Rock of Gibraltar. She sort of went into remission, got a little better. Dad was diagnosed of cancer. 7 months later, he was gone. It was a complete, it came out of left field. We were prepared to have Dad move forward with us at some point, and yet all of a sudden he's gone, Mom's left. They'd been together married for 51 years, never been apart more than 2 months in 51 years, and all of a sudden Dad's gone, and she's left to battle the cancer on her own. It was horrific.
A shock for you, you would say, Hagen?
Numb, absolutely numb. I'm still numb today. There are days it just doesn't work.
Now, you're saying that you're numb. Are there days where it just hits you and you find yourself thrown into a deep grief process, unawares that it was even going to strike?
It's a wave almost. Bill talked about being an orphan. I don't have siblings. Unfortunately, Mom, Dad, and I, it was the three of us. Now I'm the only one left. I have wonderful family, but I feel like an orphan. And Bill and I, we've talked many a time, and it's getting better. Now I remember Mom and Dad from 10, 15, 20 years ago, or when I was a young child. when it's fresh and it just happens, obviously, cancer is something that's fairly devastating physically, and you remember your parents in that way. But thank goodness I'm losing that memory now, and I'm seeing other memories that are obviously a lot happier.
Hagen, before the show today, I saw a clip with your mom being interviewed by Dr. Bill Webster. I don't know the lady, but she came across to me as such a strong lady, which to me would imply that perhaps she was that kind of a strength in your life as well.
Mom was larger than life. That's how we described her. If 100 people wanted to drop by for dinner, that was fine. She always had a good word for everyone. She had a smile. I mean, just the way she was. There was never a problem. There was never an issue. Mom and Dad got on a boat in 1958 and left East Germany with nothing in their pockets. They had me. I was 2. Couldn't speak the language, didn't have 10 cents, and absolutely made the best of it. That's just the attitude.
I'd like you to comment on the bittersweet question that I'd asked Bill earlier on in the program, that when you lose someone you love, it's bitter, it's a grievous process, but at the same time you have those wonderful memories. Have you reconciled the two?
Slowly. At the time, the wonderful memories aren't there so much. To make it more interesting, my grandmother is now 93. She just buried her daughter as I buried my mom. So the two of us are kind of left, and her comment is, well, why didn't they take me? I mean, you don't have answers for a lot of these questions. I mean, how do you discuss that with a 93-year-old woman who's gone through the war and all kinds of things, and yet her daughter has been torn away from her?
Yes, burying
so
a child. Yes.
I'm grieving a parent. She's grieving a child.
A child, yes.
It's interesting.
Wow. Wow. I told you about that interview that Dr. Bill Webster did with Hagen's mom, and we have a clip for you. In fact, we have 2 clips, but we're going to show you the first one now. Let's meet her.
I think it's much easier to help each other. I mean, after each session, we would stay in the parking lot and yappity yappity yap. And even that helps. Here we were, not quite a year later, and we were trying to help them, and we were the helpless ones. But this is what I think it's all about, is listening to each other and try to help each other. But the group, here it comes, made me strong enough that I finally can talk about it without falling to bits and pieces.
Wow, Hagen. I was glued to that. The earlier people learn in life, the better. And your mom gives such a strong message there. Were these things that she taught you that you were aware of?
Here's the irony. I dragged her to Bill kicking and screaming. Bill was out of the country. There was a Sunday dinner with people in the group at a restaurant in the West End, and I dropped her off, and within 5 minutes she was back in the car and said, I can't do this. So I took her home, and I guess a week or 2 later you got back into town, and we tried it again. And I got her there, and she actually went in and sat down, and I sat in the parking lot just in case she got cold feet again. But she managed to stay through it, and it was one of her favorite things. I mean, the next meeting was something she really looked forward to, and they became like a little family of hers. So it's funny how it started out and how the whole thing finished.
Yes.
And yet, here she is again, and it's strange looking at the monitor and seeing your mother there and, listening to it. It's a little surreal.
I could only imagine, and there she was sharing her wisdom with all of us. We're going to go now to you on the phone lines. Let's go now to Anna on line 5. Hi, Anna. You're on the line.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Welcome.
I'm just wondering, is there anything called delayed grief? Because my mother passed away when I was 24 years old, and I seem to have handled it okay. But I find that at 42, it's so much stronger, and the grief is just pouring out now.
Anna, I'm glad you asked that question. Very good one. Dr. Webster.
Well, I think, and Anna actually describes it very, very graphically. It is indeed delayed grief. And if I were talking personally to you, Anna, I would say, what's the reason for that? There's a reason for every behavior. Maybe, for example, I was around 24 when my parent died, and I had to go back to university and get my degree, and then I was coming to Canada and getting married, and things were going on. And it's later on that sometimes, something can affect us and trigger the grief process. And I would want to say, here we are at 42 now, and why now? Because this is happening for a reason. I think it's very important to sort of sit down and say, okay, now why is this coming up now? The least important thing about grief is time. So now's the time, and that's all that really matters. And now you have the opportunity to take a look at this and see, how you've been affected by this significant loss. And so in a way, that's an invitation. That shouldn't be discouraging. That shouldn't be something that gets you down. It's an invitation that says, hey, this is the time to look at it so that you can reconcile it and begin to rebuild something in your life.
Well, words of great advice. Anna, thank you for calling in with that question, and all the best. Let's go now to Jenna on line 1. Hello, Jenna, you're on the line.
Oh, hi. I had a question for you with regards to children attending funerals. Now, when my mother fell ill and passed away, I was 9 and my brother was 10, and neither one of us went to the funeral. As a matter of fact, we stopped going to the hospital when she got quite ill, and my brother seems to be very resentful of that, and I'm actually quite grateful because I have different memories now, and I don't remember her in that way. And now my own children are coming of that age, and I'm just sort of wondering, is there a good time or an age-appropriate time to bring them to something like that?
Another very critical question. Thank you for calling in with that, Jenna. What's so interesting is the difference between her and her brother and how they feel about it today. Dr. Webster.
Well, Jenna, thanks very much for this. I think this is very important. My boys were 9 and 7 when their mom died back in 1983. Now, should they go to the funeral or not? You know what I did? I gave them a choice. And I think that's the key. I think if I heard you rightly and if I discerned it, you weren't given a choice. Maybe that's what your brother's upset about, the fact that he didn't have a choice. And I think it was part of the tradition a few generations ago that, let's spare the child the grief. So let's not take him to the hospital. Let them remember grandma as she was, or whatever the situation happened to be. Let's not take them to the funeral because they might get upset. It might be an upsetting experience. I think the key with children, Jenna, is to give them the choice. My oldest son did not want to go to the funeral or to the funeral home. He wanted nothing to do with it. My younger son, he went, and I took special time and took him around. Now, my older son, in the years that have intervened since my wife died, wishes that he'd gone, but he remembers that he had a choice, so he's not upset about it. He had the choice. And I think it's giving children the choice. It's when children are disenfranchised, if you like, that it becomes a difficulty.
Wow, we're going to go for a break now. We'll continue to talk more about coping with grief after this break. Stay tuned. Hello again. Welcome back to our discussion. We're talking about coping with grief today. Our emphasis is on the loss of a parent. Dr. Bill Webster is joining me. He is a grief counselor, and also Hagen Gott, who lost both of his parents in close proximity of time. Now, we have a tape on standby too, where you're going to see a second clip. We already showed one of Hagen's mom interviewed by Dr. Bill Webster, and boy, does she have a lot of great advice to give in those clips. So we're going to show another one shortly. But before we do so, let's go now to you, Richard, on line 8. Hello, Richard. You're on the line.
Good morning, Christine.
Hello, Richard.
My father died last year in March of last year, so it's only been a year since he passed away, and he went under such tragic circumstances. He died of a heart attack in the hospital when he went in for a heart operation. And I'm still feeling the shock and the grief of it a year later, because I had to get through Christmas without him, which was very difficult. And I was just wondering, how long will it take to get over the sadness and the shock of losing my dad?
Richard, I'm sorry to hear about your loss. We're going to let Dr. Bill Webster discuss this. Plus, it's almost the anniversary, just past the anniversary.
Yeah. I was going to ask Richard, to tell me a little bit about how close he was to his dad and the relationship, because I think that's a very vital.
Yes. Richard, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
How close were you to your dad?
So I was very close with my dad.
Yeah, I mean, I think Richard, that especially when it comes unexpectedly. Hagen, I'm sure, will have something to say, because he knew that his mom and dad were going to die. That doesn't make it any easier. No. It doesn't make it more or less difficult. It just makes it different. But when it comes unexpectedly, I think sometimes the shock lasts longer. And as you said, you've just been through the first anniversary, and I'm sure that you were sort of reliving a year ago in February, and that was when Dad went into the hospital, and this is when the last time I saw him, and so on. So, I mean, I think it's not a matter of how much time, it's what you do with time. So I really would encourage you, Richard, perhaps a support program or something that can help you to talk about it. The principle that we teach in our programs is that which cannot be put into words cannot be put to rest. And so we're going to be doing some programs in the near future, and you can email me or email Christine, and we'll try and get some information to you. Our programs are without cost. There's no charge to come. It's a community program, and so I'd really encourage you to come out and to begin to explore some of the reasons why we grieve and some of the reactions that can seem so difficult.
Richard, are you living in this area?
No, I live in Mississauga.
Okay, well, that's not too
Great.
far away.
I have a wonderful program in Mississauga that starts at the end of May. So if you were to let us know, email us and we'll send you the information. And as I say, it's without cost and runs for 6 weeks, and I think you'd find it very, very helpful.
Yes. Unfortunately, I don't have a computer.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll find a way. If you could perhaps leave your name and address with someone on the line after we go off the air here, yes. Then we'll be very happy to send you some information.
Yes. Richard, thank you so much for your call, and all the best. Let's go now to Sandy on line 5. Hi, Sandy. You're on the line.
Yes. Good afternoon, Christine, and good afternoon to your guests. I'm so glad for this opportunity to raise this question, because my daughter is 24, and she's living with an anticipatory grief. Her father and I separated some 16 years ago, and she looks at him and sees him looking as though he's going to die. I see him as looking healthy, but she lives in a state of grief. And the other day we were watching a program, and because of that, she said to me she doesn't think she could live if he should die, because it would mean that she would no longer have any hope of having a relationship with him.
Wow, Sandy, thanks for calling in with that. That's quite intense. Dr. Webster.
Well, Sandy, thank you very much, and it's a very difficult issue. I mean, I'm very interested by the fact that you feel that your former husband is doing well, but your daughter feels that he might be dying. And so my question that I would have to her would be, what is it that she's fearing that she'll lose? And I think you actually indicated it. She fears that she'll never have the opportunity to have the relationship that she always felt she wanted to have. I think it's very important for her to try to address that, perhaps to find a way of communicating with him. I think you're absolutely right. It's known as anticipatory grief. But you know what? The other thing, though, Sandy, is that the reality is none of us ever knows how much strength we'll have to cope with situations until we find ourselves in it. I might say, I sometimes say, if you had spoken to my wife before she died and said, you know what, Bill will be a single parent and Bill will manage on his own and Bill will do that, she'd have laughed her head off. She'd go, yeah, right, sure he will, But when you suddenly find yourself in the situation, you find strength that goes beyond. I don't know if Hagen would like to sort of jump in and to help out here, because I think that he's found similar things too.
You have no choice but to find it, because you have two choices. You either put one foot in front of the other and keep going, or you lay down and you give up.
Yes. Sandy, I want to thank you for calling in, and please take Dr. Webster's advice seriously about communication between your daughter and her dad. And Sandy, keep a close watch on her, because your daughter may very well need further consulting or perhaps counseling, take this one very seriously. Thank you so much for calling in. And we're going to go for a break a little bit early, because when we come back, I want you to see the second clip of Hagen's mom, and we're going to show it to you after the break. Stay tuned. Hello again, and welcome back to our program. We're talking about coping with grief today. My guests, Dr. Bill Webster, who is a grief counselor, and Hagen Gott, who lost his parents in close proximity. Now, before we go on to the clip and back to the phone lines, I was asking you a question right in front of Hagen there during the break, Dr. Webster, that Hagen's personality naturally seems very humorous, very upbeat. I mean, that's how he is. We see it more perhaps during the break. I don't know what our audience picks up, but that's what I've picked up. And my question to you is, how much does a person's individual temperament have to do with their own grief process?
I think it has a lot to do with it. And you know what? I think when you watch the clip, you'll see where he got it from. You know, because he didn't come by this just all by himself, right?
Came honestly. You can laugh or you can cry. You've got two choices. So laughing's a whole lot easier.
Well said.
And that's exactly what his mom did through her illness and through her husband's illness, because she was just determined and she just did things, and it was wonderful. So he comes from good stock here.
Wow. Well, I think now is a good time to show you, our audience, a clip of Hagen's mom. Take a look at this one.
No matter what, you have to go on. You don't do anybody a favor by thinking to quit, okay? Give up the whole thing. I thought for a long time, it's not fair that we both have to go through this. But then, isn't it just like the two of us? We always did things together all our lives. Now even on the end, we have this similarity. It's like he's walking beside me and hold my hand and say, sweetheart, this is our destiny. So these last few steps, again, I went before you, but I'm right here. You just follow me. So you have to come to grips with it. And also sort of like a peace and say, okay, this is your destiny. Somebody else has written the book, not you.
Wow, that's very heartrending, I must say.
But it's also very courageous, Christine, because it's really sort of saying, you know, yeah, life has been tough, but I'm tougher. And I think that's what we make a decision about, you know. And this is what we all loved about Renata before I even knew Hagen. You know, here was Renata coming along, and we knew that her heart was broken, and yet she always reached out to somebody else. She was always there to help somebody else, encourage somebody else. And there are people who grieved her. They'd only known her for a year in our group, and they grieved her as much as anybody, because they really felt like they'd lost a friend. And this is what we can do, you know. This is where it counts.
And for those of you who tuned in later on to our program, Hagen's mom, Renata, was talking about her own husband who had passed away. And as you saw from the interview, she passed away not all that long afterward. And Hagen is her son. When you look at her advice, talking about her own husband, who happens to be your dad as well, the impact on you. I mean, here you are listening to her advice, and my first question, is this the first time you've seen this tape? Have you looked at it many times?
Bill surprised me with this clip at the funeral. This was the last thing we heard. Mom got the last word in at her funeral, and I think she really would have appreciated that. That's apropos as far as she's concerned. I can just tell you, though, that at the end, Mom wasn't afraid to go because Dad was waiting for her. Her sweetheart was there. And I think from the day after he passed away, in her mind, it was just a process. And she had certain days and things and hours and things to do and people to talk to. And then she was going to be with Dad. And I mean, I'm not the most religious person there is out there, but I know that my mom and dad are together. And it's just the way it should be. And that has helped in the grief process tremendously.
Yes.
The world is right from that perspective.
And she says, although she acknowledges the grief and it's so clear, you must go on. Can you comment on this, Dr. Webster?
That's a decision. It's a
decision
decision
to
we
make.
all have to make.
Yes.
It starts here. I mean, we feel it here, but it starts here. It's in saying, I'm determined to not let this defeat me. And I think that no matter what the problem in life, that's the choice that we have. Do we choose to be a victim or a victor? Do we choose to be bitter or better? I hate cliches. I don't want to sound like a cliche, but it's a choice. Loss is inevitable, but what we do about it is optional. And every single person watching this program has a choice. We have a choice as to what we do about what has happened. We can't change what has happened. We can change what we're going to do about what has happened. And that's what makes my work so exciting, to be honest, Christine.
Okay, now before we go for our next break, let's go now to Tamara on line 8. Hello, Tamara, you're on the line.
Yeah, hi, Christine and guests. I find it still a little bit difficult today to talk about it. I feel that it is very, very important that a child is prepared for the loss of a parent if that parent is on his or her last days. I'm talking about my time, which was right after the World War II. I was 9, and no one prepared me for my father's passing. I already had lost my mother. I was with strangers, and when my father passed on, I was put on a train, sent to my grandmother, and was told to tell Grandma my dad will arrive in a day or two. I expected him to walk into the room, the one room that my grandmother and I were in. But they brought him in a casket, and he stayed for 2 days in that room with us. So still more than, much more than half a century later, I somehow still hear these words.
Tamara, I am so glad that you called in with that, preparing your child, particularly in this particular case we're seeing here. Tamara, we're going to go for a break now, because when we come back, I'm going to throw this question over to Dr. Webster, because I know he's going to have something very important to say on that. Thanks again for your courage, for calling in. We'll be back after this. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our discussion on coping with grief. Now, Tamara called in to talk about over half a century gone by, and she's still grieving the death of her dad, because in essence, she was saying that children need to be prepared. And Dr. Webster, given the information that Tamara gave to us, what would you tell her on this? She's still feeling that pain so long afterward, which is understandable under the circumstance.
Well, Tamara, we were all very touched by your story, and
Yes.
we really appreciated you calling in with it. And I think, even 50, 60 years later, I think we have to understand it as a 9-year-old. We have to understand, what did that situation mean to a 9-year-old child? And I think you have to be a 9-year-old child to really understand it. I think you're absolutely right. I can't really comment better than you did that children need to be prepared. In our schools, we teach children about sex and everything else. We don't teach them about death. And I think it's time we did.
Yeah, something serious to deal with now. We're not going to have time to go to our last caller, who is Gary, but we know that he has a very valid question which pertains to our other guest, Hagen, today, and it's about losing both parents, guidelines on dealing with this. Hagen, some strategies you've used.
I just want to say to Gary that it does get easier. Initially,
hopeful. Yes.
Well, there's always a tomorrow. I think if my mom were here, she'd tell you that there is a tomorrow. Find someone like Bill, find people to talk to, but your memories will be replaced with fonder memories. You won't think of the funeral home, you won't think of the final days, you won't think of those. You'll go back 5 years, 10 years. That's what I'm starting to get now. I'm remembering my parents when I was a young child. All of a sudden the memories are ones that bring a smile to your face as opposed to the ones that bring you more of the pain. It gets easier.
Hagen, you gave such hope there to that question that I'm told that Gary had. Now, I want you to, if you can add anything to this, Dr. Webster.
Just simply to say that I think that when you're dealing with 2 losses in a relatively short period of time, this is not actually the way to describe it. It's like this. They're on top of each other. And so you have to separate them and to say, I'm grieving my mom, and I'm grieving my dad, and you have to spend time grieving each one. It can't be done together. It's because they're two separate relationships, albeit that they're intimately connected. I love the analogy that Hagen uses of the three legs of a stool, mom and dad and Hagen, and I think that's absolutely right. But it's grieving one, and then grieving the other, and then also grieving, that here I am, and now. But that's the challenge after the loss of a parent, that suddenly, well, now it's up to me. Now I carry on the family traditions. Now I'm on my own. So what do? How do I decide how to go on with the rest of my life, using the legacy and the courage and the strength that we've heard many people talk about? Now, it doesn't happen always, but in my own situation, I'm very blessed that even though at 23 my dad died, he gave me everything I needed. And I was able to take that and use that and adapt that, and it served me well, and I'll never forget.
Well, the two of you have certainly provided a lot of information and inspiration as well. And one thing that came across loud and clear, grieving is highly individual. So you can't tell somebody how to grieve. A whole range is normal in this process. Thank you both so much for joining me
Pleasure
today.
as always, Christine. Thank you.
And that's all the time we have for today. See you again next time. I'm Christine Williams, and from all of us, thank you for watching.